Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm your host, Adam, with my co-host, Mick Mulroy. Today, we're going to be finishing out our Raising Kids series, hopefully, with episode 4. And we're also going to be tacking on some other topics at the end that fit with this, the topics of adoption and fostering, which Mick wants to talk about with us today, which is definitely, I think, a topic that's very fitting for this conversation we've been having so far. But before that, it's been a busy little time for us. We had sort of talked about having a bit of a quick update as to what's been going on. So, Mick, why don't you let us know what you've been up to and what's been going on the last couple of weeks or week or two?
So the big event, of course, in the U.S., like in Canada this week, was the celebration of our Independence Day. It's funny because I worked all over the world and I went to a lot of countries' Independence Day, and it's always the independence from Great Britain, which is kind of funny. It's everyone. I spent a lot of time in Africa, right? So, and obviously in the U.S. and in Ireland, no, it was great. Big celebration here in Whitefish, where I live. There's actually a really large fireworks display every year, thanks to some of the more well-off residents of Whitefish. It's really cool. So a lot of people come, except for last night. Apparently, somebody hit the button early, and it went off.
Oh.
Yeah, I wasn't around for that. It stays light here till like 11 o'clock.
Oh yeah, we're
11,
up north here. It's like
yeah.
It's light until 10 at least.
Yeah. Maybe I've exaggerated it, but anyway, they hit it while it was still light.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it's all good. America's still, 1 year older, and more important than that. Oh, one thing I would like to highlight, we were talking about before that the listeners might be interested in, is they just opened Teddy Roosevelt's library in North Dakota.
Oh yeah.
I highlight that one because he was obviously a great American president and world leader, but also a Stoic, right? He actually carried copies of Epictetus's Enchiridion with him when he went on his famous trip after being president down the Amazon River. But he constantly talked about Stoic ideals throughout his career. His library, even though he's from New York, his family is in North Dakota because on one day, both his wife and mother died. And he obviously had a very difficult emotional time with that. And he credits going to the Badlands of North Dakota and basically going back to nature as what saved his life.
Yeah.
And that's why the museum is there. But I haven't been to it, so I can't say that, I recommend it, but I recommend it anyway because it's Teddy Roosevelt. And, he's like one of those leaders that, you just wish we had around today, right? He was both a Medal of Honor recipient and a Nobel Peace Prize recipient. Probably never will happen again in a politician, for sure. So I'd highlight that. And of course, and then the U.S. is an experiment in process. And I think in many ways it is like the ideals, and I think Canada is too, ideals of what many had hoped in ancient Greece at the time of the birth of Stoicism and democracy would be what the world is, right?
Yeah.
The kind of universal cosmopolitan system is what not that it's perfect. I mean, we are obviously not perfect. We are a compilation of everybody, but the ideals of individual liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion or from religion, and by the people and for the people. Certainly not exclusive to the United States, but it is what democracies are about, and the U.S. is, one of the most substantial democracies in history. So, that's what I celebrate.
Yeah. And it's a big year, right? It's 250. Is that right?
250, yeah.
250.
Yeah.
Well,
Not
I
all
mean,
by other countries' standards. I was looking at a list like
yeah,
Egypt, Ethiopia,
yeah,
it's, we're but a mere toddler compared to some of these other countries.
yeah. I was in Quebec earlier this week, and their 400th anniversary of the city was not that was a couple of years ago.
Oh,
So
really?
it's a very it's sort of an interesting juxtaposition when it's like, yeah, and then you go to Athens and it's like, oh yeah, that's right.
So how
400
old are
is
you
very young.
guys? How old are
What's
you
that?
guys? How old is Canada?
So, well, we were part of the British Empire, and then it's interesting because it's sort of we had an independence movement, but it wasn't really an independence. It was, we became what's called a dominion, and that
Mhm.
happened in 1867. So, we just celebrated 150 in 2017, I guess it was, I think, something like that. Yeah. And so we're very young, but the Canadas, as they would have called it, you'll see if you go way back, they would have called it just the Canadas, which is the northern part of North America. Obviously, I mean, it was being colonized by the French. Actually, the Vikings got to Canada before they got anywhere else
Oh,
in
yeah.
northern
Yep.
in North America. So so it's one of those things where we're sort of really young, but we're also like really old in some ways, comparatively speaking, in terms of countries in North America. So, but I think for us, a big thing for me is thinking back. We Canadians, when we like during the development of our nation, right? We were getting into like we have a constitution now that's not that old. Canadians helped write the United Nations Charter for Human Rights and Freedoms, and things like that. So I would say,
So you
as you
guys wouldn't
pointed out
have a
already.
Declaration of Independence type equivalent then, right?
Say again.
You wouldn't have a Declaration of Independence type equivalent then.
I don't remember there being one. What did happen though is that Queen Victoria essentially signed a document that made us like a dominion, meaning a separate nation under the constitutional monarchy that is
Right.
Great Britain, right? So actually, we celebrate Victoria Day. It's around her birthday, which is in May, which coincides with President's Day or Memorial Day. I think it coincides with Memorial Day, right? So we have Victoria Day, and that's for that reason. So, but what we definitely didn't have was I think I've never heard of like a foundational document like the Declaration of Independence or anything like that. It was my understanding was sort of like a street brawl near a pub in Toronto was like the
I
biggest
like it already.
thing, and then they were like, well, let's go Dominion. So the king now would be, but the queen for now because he's our king is such a new person in our world. He the queen's on our money, but
Hmm.
we're a constitutional monarchy, so we govern ourselves effectively.
And is your Constitution similar to the U.S. Constitution?
It is similar to that.
Not that you
It's
copied it,
it,
but
it's
just for
yeah,
your
yeah, it is
next right?
interesting. The thing is though is we're what's called a federation. Like when Canada formed, it was called confederation, right? So we're a federation of provinces and territories. So we have a framework that's similar to the states, but also a little bit different. And so I'm not an expert on Canadian history. Unfortunately, it's not something that I studied in high school, for example. But we do have we're a confederation, and so it's sort of a group of very individual places that are all connected. So in fact, our we were still having new territories formed in the 90s when Nunavut was formed, which is a territory up next to the Northwest Territories, and our last province was Newfoundland, which joined in
Hmm.
1951. So we were sort of still forming ourselves, even like post World War II in the middle of the 20th century. Excuse me. So it's yeah, we're sometimes we feel pretty young, then sometimes we feel pretty old. I think it really depends how you
But
look
you
at
all
it.
have something similar to our Bill of Rights, I think, in the sense
We
that you
do.
have freedom of speech,
Yes,
freedom of religion. Do you have freedom of religion
we do.
written into
Yeah.
the? Okay, and then all the core components of assembly and
Yes, we
media,
do.
etc. Oh, good. I mean, I
Yeah,
knew that, but I just didn't know that.
under the charter, under the Canadian Constitution, there's a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so in Canada, like what you might have in the States, right, is someone might say this is a Bill of Rights issue, or they might say this is a constitutional issue, and it will go to like the federal court or something like that. In Canada, we would call that a charter rights or a charter issue. So, for example, if someone feels like their ability to a big thing was in COVID, right? People were like, well, and I won't say which side of the debate I was on, but people were saying, well, I don't want to have a vaccine, or I do want to have a vaccine, and so that became a charter rights issue. So our Bill of Rights equivalence is the Charter, and then the Charter has been modified over time under the we do have a British style system, so it's what you'd call jurisprudence. So it's like court rulings become the normal, and then you use that as you define the Charter over time. So it's an interesting kind of thing. I'm probably mucking this all up. All the Canadians that are listening are freaking out, but ultimately that's pretty much how it breaks down for us. But what's interesting though is that we are very close, but also different in a way that I find quite unique. So, but in general, I mean, yes, it was Canada Day, so it's interesting. Our Canada Day celebrations include a very significant sort of British part to it. So, I took some videos while I was at the East York Canada Day Parade, which is the longest running Canada Day parade in the city of Toronto, and pipe bands and playing the Maple Leaf Forever, which actually was potentially going to be our national anthem before it was "Oh Canada," and so. There's always a sort of a mildly British sentiment to our Canada Day celebrations, which is, I mean, I grew up in England for a chunk of time, so it very much fits for me. And my grandparents one of them was born in Scotland, one of them was born in Newfoundland, so technically he was a British citizen, and he had to emigrate to Canada actually when he came here in 2028 or something like that, 1928. Or 36, I don't remember actually now that I think about it off the top of my head. But when he had to emigrate because Newfoundland was its own dominion actually under the crown. So we've always had a very British sentiment to our Canada Day, which is cool in its own way.
Well, happy.
I was going to say one thing actually because you were asking me about this. In the States, one other parallel is in the States it'll be life, liberty, pursuit of happiness is the phrase you hear a lot. Is that right?
Correct. Yep, that's it.
Right. In Canada, it's called POG, Peace, Order, and Good Government. That's our motto.
That's very
That's
British.
true. That is true. It's an interesting time for us right now because, and we've talked about this before, right? There are political elements at both ends of the country that are talking about, staying together and whatnot as a federation of provinces. But at the same time, Peace, Order, and Good Government, or POG, has been pretty much there since the start. So yeah, there's a funny history lesson about my homeland. So, yeah. So we were going to jump into finishing out discussions on Musonius Rufus's rules for raising kids, and then we wanted to jump into some discussions on adoption and fostering. So, Mick, why don't you kick us off then and start us where you think we should start?
So I think we went through all the rules that I had gleaned from that.
Oh, we did. Okay.
Yeah, but we can recap a bit. I mean, essentially, as one would expect, it's all based on Stoic principles. So teaching children that it isn't their wealth or anything material like that counts as much as it is their character.
Yeah.
Of course, they highlight the 4 virtues as key components of character. And then it's also about duty to others and service. So it's basically what an adult would be teaching him or herself to be a good Stoic is what you teach your kids to be. I mean, I'm summarizing a lot of rules here. And he, the one thing about Rufus was he was like real specific. Like if you really want rules of life and you're a Stoic, I mean, you could do well by reading everything written about his lectures, because it really does, I think, lay out a really detailed lifestyle for a Stoic. And it's equally so with children, because I mean, ultimately, as the song goes, children are the future, right? So they literally are the future. And it's probably from the Stoic perspective, the most important audience, um,
Yeah.
because that's where we like them to gravitate early on. I mean, look at Marcus Aurelius, right? So he was raised as a Stoic, and that carried with him even as he became, the Roman emperor
Yeah.
through adoption, by the way. But we'll get to that. But that is, I think, a key component in Stoicism is to focus on the next generation, and it should be so. Specific to fostering and adoption, like we talked a little bit last time, there's over 300,000 kids in the United States that are in need of fostering. So they're in some form of government control because of something happened in their life where their parents couldn't do it anymore and their grandparents and aunts and uncles weren't around. And I think, if I remember, it was around 70,000 in Canada. You guys
Yeah.
call it a different name than fostering, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's important, I think, for several reasons. I mean, we had a foster child. I mean, just talking personally, and when we lived in Kenya, and they have had issues with overflow orphanages and such. So my wife and daughter were volunteers at the orphanage, and then, as you might guess, it ended up with us fostering a child. And
Yeah.
in Kenya, you're not allowed to foster and then adopt. That
Oh,
was
it's
a law then. I
foster.
don't know
You
what
have
it.
to not, at the end of a
Yeah.
fostering period, you have to not adopt.
Yes.
Oh,
I don't.
interesting.
I don't know the logic behind it, but they didn't ask me. There's like baby testing is sort of. So we
Okay.
didn't do it. We didn't intend to adopt, but my point of bringing it up is so obviously it comes from a completely different culture, etc. I mean, we had young JJ for over a year,
Yeah.
and so by then he was just a Mulroy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
period, period. I mean, we're giving him Irish names and such. Um, Now, the good news story for us is he did get adopted by another family, and we did uh, get to know that family, which is not
Hmm.
common.
Right.
It just so happened we had a connection, and then and it was. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was brutal to say goodbye to our foster son, and I mean, it was really tough. I bring it up not to dissuade one from fostering. I bring it up because I can tell you from personal experience that a child's a child, and once you have become that child's parent, you're their
Yeah.
parent, biological or not.
Yeah.
I know that from that experience, and we still keep in touch with him, and because the family's just his parents are just super awesome. So it did work out well for us. But my point of bringing it up is that if you're wondering, like, will I ever be, if I foster or I adopt, will I ever really be the parent? I mean, my answer, and more importantly, you should ask people who are adopted parents, is yes, absolutely.
Right.
It is just as strong as a bond, I think, than um, biological. Now, other people might disagree, but I think it's important to highlight because it's when you look at it from your perspective, you want to be a parent, you want to actually be a parent. But
Yeah.
if you look at it from the child's perspective, you're likely the only thing they got. You
Yeah.
know, so are they going to grow up institutionalized? Uh, with folks that I don't know a lot about fostering. I think some people are just perpetual fosterers,
Yeah.
meaning they do a service, but they're not looking to be a parent in the traditional
Right.
sense. So being that person who either because you didn't have kids or did waited too late, or just maybe you have kids and you still want to do something for a child, which is great, and I think one of the greatest things you can do as a human.
Yeah.
It's available, and there's kids out there. It's not theoretical. They're there, and
Right.
they need a parent. And you can have a profound effect, I believe, on that person. whether you're a Stoic or not, whether you raise them in the Stoic principles of
Yeah.
that we talked about in the last 3 episodes or not. I'm obviously advocating that you do, but you can make a huge difference, and it's something that's well within the capability of most people, and unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not that enough.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk about this sort of thing because there's a history of Stoic adoption happening, right? We're talking about it now. I mean, because Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius with the
Yeah.
rule that Antoninus was going to adopt Marcus, and then Marcus was going
Five
to end up.
great emperors.
Yeah.
All of
Yeah.
them.
Marcus was the last, actually, of the five
Yeah.
great emperors, right? I think it was Vespasian, Vespasian, Domitian, Hadrian, It's those names are hard to remember sometimes, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I think so. There's that, but what I find interesting is I don't get the sense, at least in my initial research on this topic, that there is like a Stoic rule about this. A lot of people like rules. I'm not a big rule person. I always think it's a discussion point, but I do think that there are so many parts of Stoicism that resonate with the idea of adoption, right? That we actually pull people into the mindset of like doing this thing that's bigger than yourself, right? I think the core act of justice, right? The core virtue of justice, one of the four core virtues, is a big one for that. Magnanimity and benevolence towards others, I think includes, understanding that if you have the ability and the capability to perform an adoption type function or a fostering type function for someone, right? Um, you know, it's as a member of that society, I think some people might say there's even an obligation to step in when you can, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's why I think it resonates there. And then there's the simple ones of just and Rufus talks about it a lot, right? About setting that example. So, you know, setting the example of stepping in and helping when you can, and setting the example of being someone of virtue, someone of justice, someone of wisdom. I think is one of those things that goes well with this idea because you get the opportunity to help someone and not foster in terms of fostering a person, but you can foster the thoughts and the ideas that sort of come up from this, maybe a little bit more easily when you give someone that opportunity to be in a caring home, to be in a better place than being, institution in an institutional setting, like for their whole childhood or whatever. Right. So, that's my initial thoughts on it. I I have had some opportunities, like I had a long term partner who had kids, and I was very close with them, and I had definitely spoken about and thought about the idea of not it wasn't adoption, but it was like I had asked about being a guardian in the future if that was an opportunity, because I just knew that if I was given the opportunity to help, I wanted to do that if anything happened, right? And I think it's a very common thing with people to think that that's, well, you do get a lot of people that do it, as you said, where it's a bit more of a job. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then there's people who look at it as a bigger thing of like, you can help change someone's life, right? And so, I have had some experience with that feeling, at least, in making the decision within myself to say, I think. I think if this opportunity comes up, I'd like to take it, right? To say to someone like, I choose to be there for you. I choose, to be that person for you. And that's a choice that I think Stoics would make a lot more readily because we understand that, setting the example, caring for others, benevolence and magnanimity, I think is a key thing there. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting topic, especially for someone who's as I'll say single as I am, and I live alone. It's just what my life is like right now. But it's something that sometimes has come into my world a little bit in the past. So
Yeah. Stoicism does have a connection. Obviously, you've already mentioned the five great good emperors.
yeah,
Epictetus, he basically adopted a daughter late in life, right? He was
yeah,
abandoned, something that he would have understood, of course.
yeah,
Um, so it's obviously a service. It's service to that person. It's obviously a service to society too, right? But
yeah,
it is the opportunity to kind of pass down your philosophy as well. Now,
yeah,
as a parent and a godparent and a former foster parent, I can tell you, you can't really pass down your philosophy, right? It's really up to them.
Yes.
You could instill like morals and ethics, but
Yeah.
what they aren't is up to them, of
Yeah.
course. But it's whether they become a Stoic, a Buddhist, or something else. Um, you set them up for success, I
Yeah.
think, if you do follow the
Totally.
rules of Rufus when doing that. And I think
Yeah.
it's something that is only going to grow in society is a need to have more engagement with kids. Everything you read about is disengaged kids because of and we've had episodes on, you know, the influence of social media,
Yeah.
now AI. I was just reading like an article a friend sent to me about how there's so many fewer bars and pubs. Obviously, people read things like that, send that stuff to me,
Yeah.
and movie theaters, and basically any places where people gather. So
Yes.
it isn't about the consumption of alcohol. It's literally like
Yeah.
there's so fewer because people aren't going. And so you just think,
Right.
oh, maybe that a health thing. Well, it's not a health thing because it's become a mental health thing because young people and people in general aren't leaving their house. They're basically just going and sitting in their house, streaming whatever, and being on the internet.
Yeah.
Um, Big problem, but that's for another episode. But that's an issue you have to deal with when you deal with kids. And so if you don't have a parental figure, there's not a whole lot of influences that will get them away from that path. Kind
Yeah.
of social isolationism and um, a lack of
Yeah.
really getting out there.
Yeah. And but I think that does start in the home. We talked once about in one of the previous raising kids episodes about like having dinner with your kids, right? About having that conversational sort of routine. And it was interesting because Stanley Tucci's he's on the cover of The Rake, which is a men's magazine. I only know this because I'm English, but um, interestingly, he was talking a little bit about how in Italy they still do they still do the round the
Oh
table
yeah,
dinners and stuff like that, right? And it's really, and he said, I think the Italians are the ones who are really doing that thing really well still. And when I was thinking before today's episode about fostering and what that can give to somebody, right? It's that, that kind of experience, I think, is something that I hope everybody gets. I grew up in a household where the dinner table was always the place where we would talk about our day, we would talk about stuff, problems, good things, bad things, right? And we would talk about what was happening. And it was probably, I think people would think in many cases it was very formal because it was like set the table, make the dinner, or well, you're doing that at the same time, you know, put the dinner on the table, sit down. My family said grace. I'm not religious, but they did. And then, but the thing is that, that social environment, I mean, that gathering, I think is one of the things that, you know, when I was thinking about, well, like what does the ability to foster someone or adopt someone, what does that give that person being fostered or adopted? And I think in many cases, you get the opportunity to expose them to all of these amazing experiences that, can really set the stage during the biggest development phase of their lives for the social aspect of life, for the conversational and interactive part of life, away from phones. Like I grew up when I was growing up, cell phones and tablets and all that wasn't really a thing, and so the dinner table just happened to be that free. But now they have you get people putting rules in place for dinner time, right? Like no technology at the table, I think is what I've heard many times over.
good policy.
But the reality is that you know if you get the opportunity to give someone that experience, I think that can change someone's whole outlook, right? And I think that that's a real opportunity that can be taken. So
So we were watching. It's really I'd say one of my, if not my favorite movie, um, Interstellar, the other day.
oh
I
yeah,
was like, as you are a space person, I am a space nerd.
yep,
Uh, so a lot of my favorite movies revolve around that. But I bring it up one because we should do an episode on it. It's fascinating, and I
yes,
believe not that it matters, but the main actor Matthew McConaughey is a Stoic, right? He's been on
Yeah.
Stoic podcast, at least. And
At least Stoic
some pretty
parallel, that's for
interesting guy.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And did a great job in the movie. But we were watching it the other day, and I noticed it, obviously, every time I watch it, but it's also a movie about parenting, if you think about it. I mean, it's very, very obvious when you look at it from that perspective, right? I mean, it's the connection
Yeah.
between him and his daughter, and leaving to try to save the earth, and her belief in whether he knew that the chances of saving it were going to happen. Anyway, if you haven't seen the movie, highly recommended it. It's
Yeah.
recommended. It's phenomenal. And from my understanding from reading about it, from the people who know, astrophysics and quantum physics, and it was written by a physicist. So it was written to be fairly accurate about, at least from the perspective of what we think.
Yeah. That's right.
Um,
Kip Thorne, the astrophysicist. That's right.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and from that aspect, it's absolutely phenomenal. But it's also really the core tenet is parenting. It's throughout the movie is that connection between parent and child. So I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that could be an inspiration for those who are looking for one. But it's really an excellent movie, and it does talk about this connection that's, in many ways would be universal.
Yeah.
Could be universal, depending.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your opinion on something I've been kind of noodling for the last week as we lead up to this episode, which is the idea about responsibility. So I'll use another science fiction movie just to kind of preface this, which is the movie Project Hail Mary, which I'm not sure that you've
Yeah.
seen it yet, but
I have seen it. Yeah, it's excellent.
and I read the book. Like I read the book in like 8 days. I couldn't believe how fast I read that book because it's really thick. But as a space person as well, I mean, they did the film very well. But it's very interesting because Ryan Gosling's character, he doesn't want to go.
Right.
I won't spoil it too much, but there is one of the essentially the commander of the mission. He says to him like, "Well, you just have to find somebody to fight for, to do this for, right?" I think you're nodding your head, so you might remember that scene.
I totally do.
And it's interesting to me, this idea around responsibility of caring for those kids or nephews or nieces or whatever that may not be yours, right? So do you see it as a obligation, a responsibility? Like, how do you see it? Because you've actually been a foster parent. I haven't. So how do you see it in your mind?
I do view it as an obligation. And there's one part of the movie when he's talking to, I think is it Anne Hathaway, the other main actress, and
Yeah.
they're talking about love, right? And they're talking about how gravity can move back and forth between
Yeah.
dimensions, and then McConaughey's character Cooper is talking about love, but love as a process of evolution, right? It makes sense to have
Right.
to have this bond because it's the propagation of the species. And then Hathaway's character, which I think is named Dr. Brand in the movie, says, then why do we still love people that are dead?
Yeah.
And then he comes with a realization that, oh, it's not just an evolutionary paradigm, because that wouldn't hold for people that are dead. You see what I
Right.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a very poignant part of the movie. And I think, to tie that with the parenting aspect, that is kind of like, if there's anything, some people get really nervous about the fact that they're going to die. If there's anything that I think could really lessen that, is the idea that you've done something that's going to continue. And I don't mean
Yeah.
like personal accolades or any kind of that kind of self stuff, but in another person, like
Yeah.
you've helped another person to be what they are, and they're going
You've
on.
made a difference.
You've made
Right.
a difference. You've kind
Yeah.
of like done your duty.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people view that as like, well, then I need to be able to have my own kids, but I don't think it's your own anything. Like, you don't own your biological kids any
Mm-hmm.
more than anybody else, especially when they're not
Yeah.
kids anymore. I mean, you never own them, but you get my point. But I
Yeah.
don't think there would be a difference if you had an adopted child or a biological child. I don't. And I guess adoptive parents and children would be better suited to say that. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's a duty to help the next generation.
Yeah.
We're a society, whether you like it or not. And if you say, well, no, I'd rather pull away from society. Oh yeah. Well, are you driving a car, or living in a house,
Yeah.
getting your, plumbing fixed? Are you going to the grocery store? I mean, you
Yeah.
couldn't do any of those things if you were literally just you, right?
Yeah.
That's because of us. You live in a society. Uh, so
Yeah.
something
Oh,
to
for sure.
consider. And it doesn't have to be as significant as fostering adopt. You could do things like volunteer at the school. You could volunteer at the boys club, girls club, or
Yeah.
equivalent. There's all sorts of other things you could do to really give back. And maybe as you get done with your working part of your life, that's also a potential for you to consider,
Yeah.
us to consider, myself included.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I can say for myself, like I had looked for a long time about doing big brother, big sister program type thing, right? Because it is just me, and I've had a kind of a weird. If I ever listed off all the jobs I ever had, and I have done it for people I've mentored in the past, they're always like, "Wow, that is a very broad range of things," and a lot of it isn't engineering. And I'm like, "Yeah, I know I was a late bloomer on engineering," but I think that obligation or responsibility, I think it even shows up when it isn't just about adoption or fostering, right? Like there are so many kids out there that in my life that know me as Uncle Rocket, and and I'm usually the science guy, so they're usually like, can you teach us how to do this? And I love to do the you can make a light bulb go on using like a penny and a pickle. I don't know if you know that
Yeah,
science
yeah,
thing, right?
potatoes. I'm familiar.
And I've done a lot of pickle light bulb things, so I'm looking
Mm,
for something else.
mm,
But it was really interesting, right? Because I think that obligation shows up in many ways. Like I was visiting a friend recently, and I finally got to meet, because she was a COVID baby. I finally got to meet her daughter. Shout out to Annie. I got to meet her daughter, and we ended up building some kits that I had of some little mechanisms and stuff. And I realized, that there is a responsibility to that, right? You get the opportunity to show a kid that they can make something of their own, right? And it gets hard, right? Like it didn't work the first time. We had to take part of it apart and then go back to fix it. But, when we talked about Busonius rules, for example, it's like, they should experience hardship. I think those are the kinds of things. And so exposing them to that, broad range of experiences, right? I mean, those are kind of obligatory responsibilities, I think, that we have as well. And so, but I am with you on this one. I mean, like there's so many kids out there that they just want to be loved. And I think chosen is probably the right way to put it, right? So, I think if anybody's thinking about doing it, I would at least, if you agree, I imagine you would. I would say, really think about it. I mean, there's just so many opportunities out there to make a difference in someone's life. And as you talk about the next generation, right? I mean, and I can't remember if the parable is Greek or Japanese. I can't remember, but the one about like, you can tell the maturity of a culture or society by people planting trees that whose shade they will never
mm.
sit in, right?
That's right.
And I
That's great.
think, say again.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, and I can't remember where it comes from specifically. It might actually be Greek, but I can't remember. But um, I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? Like you think about like, how do I want this to look for the future? To understand that our decisions will echo forward and ripple out like through time. We're talking about Interstellar. I think it's one of those things where there's definitely a feeling there of responsibility and obligation that we all have to look at ourselves and introspectively think about. So, well, that's probably a good spot for us to start wrapping up. But Mick, is are there any further thoughts or anything you'd like to close with today for us?
Well, I think you just summed it up really well. I hope that there's people out there that are hearing this and thinking about it, that they seriously think about it, because it can really make a difference. And maybe you're not in a place where you can do it now, but you could later. I think I
Yeah,
mentioned in one of the other episodes, there's a good movie called Instant Family, which I believe is based on a true story. And it is
yeah,
about a couple who, and they have to find a lot of the problems when it comes to fostering is that there's siblings, right? So they don't want to split up children, obviously, from their siblings. And it's very difficult to get a foster family to adopt, 2 or 3 at the same time, or foster, right? So that's what this is about. I highly recommend it. It's a very good movie, but it may be, by definition of good movies is it makes you think. More books.
Yeah.
And I think this does. It's a comedy, but it is I think pretty thought provoking when it comes to this topic.
Yeah. No, I mean, excuse me, I agree, and I think one thing as well you sort of see in and there's a couple of sort of movies from history that I really like to think about when it comes to this is movies like Ikiru. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Akira Kurosawa film about an older gentleman who lives alone, and he gets diagnosed with an illness, and then he realizes that he hasn't really done anything with himself, so he sort of decides to take over an activity to rebuild a park that was torn down because of the war. This is in Japan, and he decides that he's going to try and do that thing where he leaves a legacy that he'll never be able to experience for himself. And I think, it's a really good theme. It's another one of those films I would say you watch it and then you think about it for a while afterwards. And they've remade it like 3 or 4 times, and still the original's excellent. But yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up there. But I think, it's probably safe to say that we'll talk about this again. But this is definitely, I think, the conclusion of our Raising Kids 4-part series. So, which has been, I've really enjoyed hearing from you on this, Mick, because you have an experience very different than me on this one. So, but yeah, we'll wrap up there. So we'd love to hear from you in the audience. We'd love to hear from you in the audience by writing us emails at info@pubandporch.com. Leave us a comment, ascribe, as many YouTubers say. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And if you are thinking about doing something like that, maybe give it a really hard look. So thanks, Mick, for today. Cheers.
Let's launch it. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.